Hey, it's John Wheatcroft here again with another Sunday Q&A. We're up to week number 27. I'm knocked out by the kind comments that I received in the last week. Thanks very much. Some great questions. So we've got some interesting topics. Hopefully today we're going to take a look at how you might use note restrictions or just general kind of pointed improvisational topics to create ideas. You're being really specific, inventing some games when we practice and things like that. We're also going to look at a thing I call the 251 generator. If you're interested in developing your Charlie Parker like Bebop vocabulary, that's something we're going to look at. But I'm going to start with a piece. I'm going to play the evergreen Django Reinhardt standard Nuages. So it's just going to be guitar and bass this week. I hope you enjoy, as always. Yeah, take care. I hope you get something from this, and I'll see you after the tune. I had a message from Craig relating to 251 vocabulary, asking about how you build up variations or how you begin to build up a kind of a repository of ideas that you can draw from. So here's a concept, we can call this the 251 generator, if you like, where we can combine a number of phrases that you would play over the 2 chord. In this case we do everything in the key of D major. So the 2 chord being an E minor 7. I was voicing it like this. So you just hear the root, the 3rd and the 7 going to an A7, and then what happens on those middle 2 strings, what was the 3 and the 7 becomes the 7 and the 3, and then we can end with. So you've got very, very close voice leading here. E minor, A7, D major 7. Okay, so one of the things that we can do, this is kind of Charlie Parker, like Bebop vocabulary, is we can build up a library, if you will, of phrases that aim for this flat 7. We're aiming for this, in this case, the note of D. So it's kind of the tonic of the 1 chord, but it's the flat 7 of the 2 chord, which is an E minor 7. So maybe I'll give you 5 phrases. So first one can just be D minor 7 arpeggio, and it's good to have different ways to finger these things depending upon where you might be. So the second one could be an octave displaced version of that. So meaning instead of the E note being in the low octave, I'll put it on the top. Okay, and what's going to happen with all these phrases? They're going to go. And now we're in A7 world, as it were. So this part is in E minor, and then with A7. So that's number 1. Number 2 could be. Number 3, again coming from the root, could be. Now in this case I'm going to go below. So that's an enclosure. So it's not strictly going directly from the flat 7, but it's effectively just delaying that resolution. So instead of it going, it's going. So okay, and then maybe I'll do what was that, 3? I'll do 1 from the 5. Okay, so and then 1 from the 3. So just to recap, we've got number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. So I'm just kind of picking these pretty much at random, really. You know, obviously there are loads of other ways of doing this, so just so we have somewhere to begin. Okay, so what happens next is when we hit this note, now we're spelling out the A7, and this very often is some pattern that relates to a 7 flat 9, so it might be a diminished arpeggio, because if I play an A7 flat 9 from the root, you get root 3 5 7 flat 9, and those 4 notes are diminished arpeggio. Because a 7 flat 9 shares the notes with diminished. So it's a 5 note arpeggio, root, 3, 5, flat 7, flat 9, of which those 4, so the 3rd, the 5th, the flat 7 and the flat 9, by itself create a diminished arpeggio. So I can use this as a way to connect. So if I take my 5 phrases, 5-1. So that was the second phrase. But refingered to work in this area. Okay, so 2, 5. Okay. Hope this is making sense. So what we can do now, so our next stage is to build up a vocabulary or a library of 5 chord ideas. Now that we've set up our 2 chord, going to the 5, we can decide upon 5 phrases. We'll choose 5 of each, why not? That are going to outline, in this case, the A7. Okay, so the first one could be just straight up that diminished 7th. And then that will resolve to the 5 of our D chord. So I could tag any one of those 5 intro ideas to those ending ideas, and that's going to give me 2, 5, 1. Okay, now of course we want more than just one option here, so let's create the other 5 options. So we can octave displace this. So instead of it being the 3rd, the 5th, the flat 7, the flat 9, we can go the 3rd, the 5th, flat 7, the flat 9. So that will give us through the 5 starting ideas. So it's good to have different fingering options. Okay, and what was the 4th one? What's that one? 5th was. Oh. So again, so we can take that. Okay, so let's do. Let's see a few more of these ending ideas, and of course you just build up a library of these things. So this is number 1. Number 2 is octave displaced. Number 3, just maybe chromatic. I might go. Yeah, so I'll do a chromatic idea. See the idea? So whatever you've got. This is making sense. So that's 3, isn't it? So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 4, maybe I'll do a tritone. So in this instance, what this is like going E minor, E flat 7, or okay, you can octave displace that one as well. Making sense? So that's 4 or 5 maybe. I'll give you one more. This one can be like an altered one where we just kind of just briefly touch on the altered scale. So you could actually argue that's come from that scale, but it could also be. It could be coming from either the altered scale, or it could be coming from the half whole. Coming from half whole, that's an option there. But it's just a phrase that goes from the the major third of the dominant chord. So just to run through them again, the 5 opening phrases are number 1, number 2, which is the same phrase with octave displacement. Then we went from the tonic again with that enclosure. Then I think I went from the 5, 5th degree of the chord, and then from the 3rd. Okay. My 5 endings were 7 flat 9, octave displaced. Okay. Then I think what else did I do? I went chromatically, didn't I? It was 3. I think 4 was, and 5 was. But there's loads of these. That's one of my favourites. So the variation on a diminished idea. Then we step up. So a few more there. But there's loads of these things. But just 5 is a good place to begin with. So 1, 2, 3 was, 4 was, and 5 being. Okay, so now of course any front end can go to any back end. So I've now got 25 phrases because I can use number 1. With number 1, I can use number 1. With number 2. With 3. Might have to find a more convenient fingering. 5, or I can do 2 with 1, 2 with 2, 2 with 3, 2 with 4, 2 with 5. You can string them together as well to do things like 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. So if I go 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, like so. So then I connect one from here. 3, 6, which one do I want? I don't know, this one. Then connect to this. So that's how you hear these. Those kind of phrases going on. Charlie Parker's playing. And think, okay, how's that working? I'm going in for the 7 of this chord. Now any one of those back end ideas, number 2 I think, then I play number 4, then I play number 1. And we can string them together like so, and this is how you get these sort of long moving lines that can whiz through, you know, fast moving changes. So that's the major version. So next up we're going to take a look at what we would do to make these into minor. Generally speaking, when we deal with a minor 2-5-1, we're expecting it to be, again we'll do this time D minor, we're expecting to see an E minor 7 flat 5 go into an A7, which again can be A7 flat 9, so we can treat this in pretty much exactly the same way. And of course go into some form of D minor chord, you know, whatever that might be. 6, D minor, major 7, D minor 7, whatever. Okay, now if we play our 3rds and 7ths, now there's no distinction here. So sometimes a nice voicing for this is where you put the flat 5 in the bass. So we begin to kind of hear it as a minor 7 flat 5. And there's our A7, flat 9 to 7 perhaps. So our voice leading there. That's our voice leading. So 3 and 7, 7 and 3, 3 and 7. Okay. So I know I'm using these in just this one area of the guitar. Of course, we want to learn these phrases in lots of different places. That's why it's good to know them with different fingering. So, for example, go back to majors for a moment. I might learn them going going that direction, but then also going more towards the body of the guitar, and with an E string root perhaps. so on. So you've got some choices, you know. Now, these things, it might seem very prescribed, like, you know, kind of a bit it's contrary to the idea of improvisation. And at first, these things are going to be like licks, you know, things that you've learned. But I've got to be honest, now when I play these, they just come out now, and I'm always making variations on them. This is very specific, the way that I'm putting it across now, but this is really more like a teaching device, to be honest, just so that you've got some way of getting in. And then once you've like really drilled down on one or two of these variations, you'll find yourself just creating them in real time and just being able to hear these connections without it necessarily being sort of preset licks. But, you know, we've got to start someplace, you know, and this is a really, hopefully, valuable place to be in if you're looking to follow chord changes, those rapid chord changes you hear in Charlie Parker tunes, rhythm changes and things like that. Okay, so back to minor for a moment. So we could see this as E minor 7 flat 5 or E minor 7 flat 5, A7 flat 9, and then D minor. Of course, it's great to play the arpeggios. So that was like an E minor 7 flat 5, A7, flat 9 to a D minor 6. Okay, but that sounds like arpeggio world, doesn't it, really, rather than like musical phrases. So let's just go back to our first 5 we had for the major 2-5-1. If I remember rightly, it was 1, 2, 3 was 4, and 5 was. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify those 5 phrases so that they now fit the minor 7 flat 5 template. So number 1 would be. Okay, number 2 would be. Okay, number 3, that was your. So now I'm going to go. So then putting that flat 5 in. Number 4 was number 5 of the chord. Now number 5 was previously was this, so that's the minor third, which is the same in a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Although I'd had this a natural second, you might wish to go. Although the natural second can work against that chord, which is a sound that I use a lot. With a natural second in it, maybe it's more obvious, if you like, or maybe it sounds much more like it's going to go to minor if in this instance I use the flat second though. So just so we're not overcomplicating things, we've got number 1, and then whatever we do from that point. Number 2, and again where do we go from there? Number 3, number 4, number 5 with this flat 2. Hope this is clear, yeah. Of course, I'm only using one finger in there. You can find them in as many different places as you can. It's kind of like your job, as it were, for to make these things work. Okay, then when I get to the 5, I just do exactly the same kind of thing as I did with the minor. The only thing I have to be a bit careful of is if my 5 line doesn't go to the 5th of the chord. Say, for example, I've chosen something like that in major, or I think or something like that where it goes to the major third. Now that's obviously going to have to go to the minor third. So let's do the 5. I think the 5 that I chose though before, they all ended on the 5th of the chord, if I'm not mistaken. I think one of them maybe ended on the root, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think they did all end on the 5. Yeah. Let's find out. Okay, so number 1 was. Okay, so that's fine. That'll work for both major and minor because it's not really expressing that major third. Okay. The second one was the same note, so that'll be fine too. Just in different octaves. The third one, if I remember rightly, was just chromatically, wasn't it? So you can either do 2 notes, 3, or so. Yeah, the 5 of the chord. Fourth one was a tritone, or, and this one. So I would say with this, the only thing you've got to be careful of, if you do expand, if you take that any further, if you use the half whole, that tends to want to go to major because it's referencing that major third. So half whole tends to want to go to major, unless you do something that's less linear. As soon as I go, it feels like it wants to land on that major third because you've got an expectation of where it's going to go. Whereas if you break that up by playing something that's more intervallic, then it doesn't have that same tendency of wanting to resolve to major exclusively. So you can use it, you've just got to be a bit careful. Okay, so what that gives us is that same combination. So let's run through some of those combinations now in a minor situation. So here's our 2-5-1. So I go number 1, 1 to 1, 1 to 2, or another finger. 3. Making sense, I hope. The fifth one. So instead of like, yeah. Oh no, it was that. My apologies. Okay, so we can begin to string those together. You could go minor, major. So we run that slowly. I went, in this instance, like an F sharp half diminished, which is this kind of thing, to a B7, to an E minor, to an A7, to a D. So my line, I think, something like this. So that would get us to 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Like if you wanted that 3 chord, that makes it sound like the 1 chord. In this case, it's become a D7 rather than a D major 7, which is what you get if you play the minor chord. So that's going back to the stuff we did last week, I think, where I talked about there's a kind of a ladder of chord substitutions that you can play on top of a chord. So if I play D7, I can play F sharp half diminished off the 3rd, and it gives me the sound of D9, and so on. And on it goes. So I'm hoping that gives you some vocabulary with 2-5-1s. Just going to leave you with one last thought with this. This is for short 2-5-1s, like i.e. when it goes 2, 5, 1, like so. But you can still use these when it goes 2, 5, 1. When it's a long 2-5-1, we have a bar on each. What we do is we squeeze the lick in over the 5 chord. So what you're effectively getting is 2, 5 sus, 5, 1. So you go 2, whatever the phrase might be, yeah. So you can put them in a long 2-5-1. You might go. You put it into there, so you might go. So what I'm doing there is I'm going 2, 2, 5, 1. Rather than playing that tension, you know, that kind of, which needs to be resolved for the whole bar, or effectively you're going resolution, or inside. 3, 4, inside, tension, resolution. So you cram it into one bar. So I'm hoping that's going to give you some insights into some of those bebop phrases and give you some vocabulary. Of course, I'm just using those examples as teaching examples, just to give you somewhere to start. Substitute them with your own ideas and you'll be good to go. I had a great question from Daniel about ideas, trying to develop your own ideas when improvising. And what would you do in the scenario where if the ideas dry up? So particularly in a live performance where you might then begin to rely on licks and things that are automatically going to work. But in practice, when there's less pressure, how can you kind of sort of oil the kind of creative process, as it were? My take on this is to try and make practice rather like a game, if you can. Restriction exercises are a really, really great thing to do. So I'm just going to give you just a few ideas here. I've got to say, acknowledge influence when it happens. The great book by Mick Goodrick called The Advancing Guitarist. I think I'd be a very different player if I hadn't have got hold of a copy of that book at just the right stage, it seems. And it's full of, if you've not seen that book before, well, first off, I'd suggest that you check that out. It's just full of really, really great ideas for things that you do when you practice. Things like, using a restricted range of the guitar, maybe only using one string, maybe even using one finger, and just seeing what you can come up with. It doesn't necessarily give you the answers, but it inspires you with lots of different activities and things that you could do if you felt like trying them out. And it's a lifetime's work, that book. I don't think I ever necessarily worked through it sequentially from beginning to end. I just dipped into it and found an exercise and went for it. So a lot of these things, I'm pretty sure, are going to be influenced by stuff that I read in that book. So yeah, check that book out. That'll be the first thing I'd say. So what I've done, I've set up a little D minor groove that sounds like this. Real simple D minor. And I'm going to do everything in a very restricted range, like D Dorian around here. That sounds. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is see if I can just play with a single note. Right. So if I can't find anything else to play, then just bring things right down to basics. So can I make this work? There, I expanded it then to allow myself, the game, change the rules of the game. So the first game is, what can I do just with the note of D? If I can't make that work, then why am I even playing around with all the other notes? It's like I've got to really be in control of what I'm playing. So I'll start with one note. And then, once I play with that for a while, I'll give myself the luxury of a second note. Maybe a third note. Maybe a fourth. Moving around to different areas. Now that, in this instance, I'm really improvising, and the concept behind this is, forgive my terrible singing, that you're actually not necessarily thinking, at no stage there am I even considering that I'm going, A, C, D, F, D. It's boom ba do da doom, ba boom ba ba doom boom ba boom. Something like that, Boom 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 ba boom. That's what I'm thinking. I'm not thinking 5th degree, flat 7, root minor third. Not at all. Even if you start then adding in some extra notes. So now I'm adding in notes that don't belong in the scale. And so on, you can kind of play around with that. So stick to the notes in the scale, now we play a whole scale maybe. Now I'm really improvising rather than playing licks there. So with this in mind, the fact that you can create stuff sort of at will means you don't really need to memorize stuff. You just come in with a concept. The thing you need to memorize is what notes fit with what chords, I guess. But that stuff's dealt with in practice, I would say. So as a thing to try, the restriction exercise is really, really cool. So this concept of just playing one note. Maybe expand it to 2. 3. 4. 5. Expanding it and becoming more kind of inclusive, where you include every note. So that could be the first restriction exercise, just being really specific about what notes you're going to play. You can do this against changes as well. This is something I've done a lot of. Take a tune, all the things you are, something, you can only play the root third. Things like that, or maybe root second third. Then you begin to expand from that, play them in different octaves, displace things. You can go crazy with this stuff. So that's the first thing, restricting the notes that you use. I'll stick with the same groove and the same kind of ideas and just see how we could expand upon this. So here's our loop. So we can now say we're going to just use the Dorian mode in this instance, and we've decided that's our device we're going to use. Okay. Now, you want to have every possible available way into that sound. So one thing we can do is we can practice, first off, just as a scale, being able to enter that scale from every degree. So I can go from the root to the root. So really hearing what that root sounds like in and of itself. That's a fairly obvious one, yeah. But this is maybe a bit less obvious. How about going at it from the third? And being able to hear that. get in and out on the third. So a lot of phrasing there just coming from the third or from the fifth. From the fifth. Pretty simple stuff, but it's really useful to be able to get into a sound from every degree. There's the fifth degree, and you hear it, then the seventh down. And then maybe the more kind of exotic sounds, the nine. So coming in on the nine, drop, just going straight in. So you don't have to use like it's like the difference between like random access and sequential. You know, sequential memory means to get to the nine, you've got to go 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I want to be able to just go 9, you know, and get straight in at that note, you know, or every note. So then you've got the 11. Or the 13. So that's the whole scale, but from every degree. So that'll be something I would work on. So you've got some kind of a phrase from the root. So from the third. So from the fifth. So from the seventh. Something from the 9. Something from the 11. And then something from the 13. Hoping that makes sense. You could even go from degrees that are not in the scale, like the major 7. Try and find ways in from the non-scale degrees. That's something like Michael Brecker would do. You know, he's got strategy for playing off the major third of a minor chord and stuff like that. You know, maybe that's one for another day. But that's the second thing then. So coming in from every degree of the scale. I'll give you one more idea with the same kind of theme here, based around entering a scale from any point. So this one's going to be less thinking about the intervals and less sort of theoretical, if you like, but a physical relationship to the scale or the notes that you're playing. So I'm going to ask myself, can I play lines that begin or end, or maybe for the purposes of this game I'll say things that begin and end, on the first string? So can I go, you know, then I'll find different ways. Okay. And once I'm comfortable with that, can I enter the scale on the second string? Know what's coming next, yeah? Third string. So coming in and coming off on the third string. Then the fourth string. 5th string. And 6th. And this is the kind of thing, you know, Mick Goodrick would talk about, you know, can you play? And that gets predominantly on the 5th string. And improvising in this case on the 5th string. I think I maybe put a couple of notes on the 6th. So in this respect, you know, you're coming into it just from a limited range. And again, you could do that same thing, put it through a tune. You know, can you play a chorus of All the Things You Are on the E string, you know, or on the B string? If you can play it on the G or the D, you're doing pretty well. Because generally speaking, what tends to happen is we become much clearer at seeing things on the outside edges than in the middle. So something that I've worked on is those kind of ideas. You know, can I play a whole chorus of a tune, say, but just in the middle strings? And you see it in a different way. You begin to see the sort of the connection between the chords in a different way, rather than when you see these massive, great big versions of a scale that cover the whole neck. And like a lot of these things, you kind of become blinded by the options, which is, so I think these restrictions, when you give yourself like the rules of a game, these restrictions can be really helpful in the creative process, because it limits the amount of possibilities, which in this instance is a good thing, because you can always broaden the net. You know, you can widen the net once you're actually into an idea, but just to get you going and just to jumpstart the creative process, sometimes the less choices you've got, the better, because then it means you can worry about other musical things other than what notes are you going to play, or where do I begin? What note do I start on? Well, we know what that's going to be because we've decided it's going to be the 9th. Okay, in you go. Or it's going to be the 4th string, you know, whatever that might be. So that's another related topic. Again, all about restrictions. So yeah, good luck with this. Where does the time go, eh? So we're at the end of week 27. Thanks for getting this far. Really appreciate you checking this out. So please, as always, please keep the comments coming, keep the questions coming. We've got plenty of stuff to look at over the coming weeks. I hope you're enjoying these sessions as much as I'm enjoying putting them together. Big shout out to Rob and Killy for their amazing pick and fantastic guitar. It's absolutely beautiful. Both of them, they work really well together. Yeah, I hope lockdown is not too torturous. We've got a couple of weeks left, and hopefully there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah, take care. Have a great week. Please, any likes or shares are greatly appreciated. So yeah, keep the questions coming, and I'll see you next week with number 28.